The woman who attended her own funeral. The decision to disappear. Nobody plans to attend their own funeral. At least, not until they stop trusting the people around them. Sarah Whitmore never imagined she would become that person. At 58 years old, she had everything most people dreamed of. A beautiful home, a successful business, financial security, and a respected reputation in her community. But despite all of that, Sarah felt something was wrong. It began with small things. Tiny details that most people would have ignored. A missing document, a strange phone call, an employee insisting she had approved a decision she had never made. At first, Sarah blamed stress. After all, the previous year had been difficult. Her husband Richard had passed away after a long illness. His death had left a hole in her life that nothing could fill. For more than 30 years, Richard had been her closest friend. Now the house felt empty. The silence felt louder every day. But soon, Sarah realized the strange incidents weren't accidents. Someone was deliberately moving pieces on a board she couldn't see. One afternoon, she sat in her office reviewing company accounts. Something immediately caught her attention. Several large transfers had been authorized from a secondary account, an account she rarely used. Sarah frowned. She had no memory of approving them. She checked the signatures. They appeared authentic. Too authentic. Her stomach tightened. Someone had copied her signature perfectly. That evening, she drove home in silence. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Questions filled her mind. Who would do this? And why? As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed something unusual. The front door was slightly open. Sarah froze. She was certain she had locked it. Slowly, she stepped inside. The house appeared untouched. Nothing seemed stolen. Nothing seemed damaged. Yet she knew someone had been there. She could feel it. For the first time in years, fear settled into her chest. A fear she couldn't explain. The next morning, she hired a private investigator named David Mercer. David had spent 20 years uncovering secrets for wealthy clients. If someone was targeting Sarah, he would find out who. Weeks passed. David began uncovering troubling information. Several people close to Sarah appeared to be hiding things. Her nephew Mark had serious gambling debts. Her business partner Ellen had recently transferred money into unknown accounts. Even her longtime friend Linda seemed connected to suspicious financial activity. The deeper David investigated, the darker the picture became. One evening, David arrived at Sarah's house carrying a thick folder. His expression was grim. Sarah knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. David placed the folder on the table. "Sarah, someone is preparing for a future without you." A chill ran down her spine. "What do you mean?" David opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, insurance forms, property records, financial agreements. People close to her had been making unusual moves. Moves that would only benefit them if Sarah were gone. Completely gone. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The realization felt impossible. These were people she trusted, people she loved, people who had attended family dinners, celebrated holidays, shared years of memories. Yet the evidence suggested something terrifying. Someone wanted her out of the way. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat alone in her living room. Rain struck the windows. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow felt darker. Then a thought entered her mind. A dangerous thought. What if she disappeared? What if she gave everyone exactly what they wanted? Not forever, just long enough to learn the truth. The next morning, Sarah shared the idea with David. At first, he thought she was joking. Then he realized she was serious. "You want to fake your death?" Sarah nodded. "If people believe I'm gone, they'll stop pretending." David stared at her. "It's risky. I know. It could destroy relationships." Sarah gave a sad smile. Maybe those relationships are already destroyed. For several days, they discussed the plan. Every detail had to be perfect. No mistakes. No loose ends. Then fate provided an opportunity. Sarah often drove a winding road near a remote lake outside town, a place where accidents occasionally occurred. If a vehicle went into the water, recovery could take days. The plan slowly took shape, and once it started, there would be no turning back. On a cold Friday evening, Sarah made preparations. She left behind personal belongings, scheduled messages, and carefully crafted evidence. Everything needed to convince the world she was gone. As darkness settled over the town, Sarah climbed into her car. She drove toward the lake. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not because she feared death, but because she feared the truth she might discover. Several hours later, emergency services received a report. A damaged vehicle had been found near the water. The driver's door was open. The owner of the vehicle was Sarah Whitmore. News spread rapidly. Family members received phone calls. Friends gathered. Social media filled with condolences. By sunrise, everyone believed the same thing. Sarah Whitmore was dead. Everyone, except Sarah herself, hidden safely inside a small cabin miles away. She watched the news report on television. Her own photograph appeared on the screen. The reporter spoke softly. The community mourned. Friends expressed shock. Family members cried. Sarah stared silently. Then David entered the room, carrying fresh information. His face had turned pale. "What happened?" Sarah asked. David looked directly at her. "They're already discussing your inheritance." Sarah's heart stopped, and what she heard next would change everything she thought she knew about the people she loved. Watching the funeral. The words echoed inside Sarah's mind long after David spoke them. "They're already discussing your inheritance." For several moments, she couldn't speak. Just yesterday, everyone believed she was alive. Today, some of those same people were already talking about her money, her property, her business, her legacy, not her life, not her memory, not the woman they claimed to love. Sarah slowly lowered her eyes. A painful realization settled over her. Perhaps she didn't know the people around her as well as she thought. The next 3 days passed in secrecy. Sarah remained hidden inside the small cabin while the town mourned her supposed death. Television stations covered the story. Newspapers published tributes. Friends posted emotional messages online. Everyone seemed heartbroken. At least, that's what it looked like on the surface. Meanwhile, David continued gathering information. The deeper he looked, the stranger things became. Several family members had already contacted attorneys. Others had requested access to financial records. One relative even attempted to enter Sarah's home without permission. Every new report felt like another crack forming in the image Sarah had built of the people she trusted. Then came the funeral, the event everyone expected would honor her life. The event Sarah secretly planned to attend. Disguised beneath a dark coat, sunglasses, and a simple wig, Sarah followed David into the church parking lot. Her heart pounded. Every instinct told her this was a mistake, but she needed answers. Today, she would finally see how people behaved when they believed she was truly gone. The church was already crowded. Cars filled the parking lot. Guests dressed in black slowly entered through the large wooden doors. Many carried flowers. Others wiped tears from their faces. Sarah watched quietly. Some looked genuinely devastated. Others seemed more interested in being seen. Inside the church, soft music filled the air. Candles flickered along the walls. At the front stood a large photograph of Sarah smiling. Seeing her own memorial felt surreal. It was like looking at someone else's life. David guided her toward a hidden section near the back where they could observe unnoticed. One by one, guests approached the podium. Stories were shared. Memories were told. People praised Sarah's kindness, her generosity, her strength. Listening to them, Sarah almost believed every word. Almost. Then something happened. During a break in the service, guests gathered in small groups. And that was when the masks began to slip. Sarah noticed her nephew Mark speaking with 2 relatives. His voice was low, but not low enough. "Do you think she changed the will before she died?" One relative shrugged. "I doubt it." Mark smiled. A smile Sarah had never seen before. A smile that didn't belong at a funeral. If the old version stands, things could get very interesting. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't grief. This was anticipation. Minutes later, she overheard another conversation. Her longtime business partner Ellen stood near a side hallway. A man Sarah didn't recognize joined her. "You'll have control now," the man said quietly. Ellen glanced around nervously. Not yet, but soon. Sarah's pulse quickened. Control? Control of what? The business? Her assets? What exactly were they planning? As the service continued, Sarah found herself paying less attention to the speeches and more attention to the whispers. The whispers told a different story, a story hidden beneath the tears, a story of greed, ambition, and secrets. Then came Linda. For more than 20 years, Linda had been Sarah's closest friend. They had survived heartbreaks together, celebrated milestones together, shared countless memories. If there was one person Sarah trusted completely, it was Linda. When Linda approached the podium, tears streamed down her face. Her voice trembled. "Sarah was like a sister to me." Guests nodded sympathetically. Many began crying. Even Sarah felt emotional. Until later, after the ceremony ended, outside the church, guests slowly gathered in small groups before leaving. Sarah remained hidden nearby, watching, listening, waiting. Then she saw Linda walk toward the parking lot. A black sedan pulled beside her. A man stepped out. Linda quickly entered the vehicle. Something about the interaction felt wrong. Too rushed. Too secretive. Sarah immediately signaled David. The investigator nodded. Minutes later, they followed the vehicle from a distance. The car eventually stopped at a quiet restaurant on the edge of town. Linda and the unknown man entered. David managed to secure a table nearby. Sarah sat hidden behind a menu. Her hands trembled. What she heard next shattered her heart. The man leaned forward. "Nobody suspects anything?" Linda shook her head. "No." And Sarah? For a moment, silence filled the table. Then Linda answered. "She's gone." The man smiled. "Good." Sarah felt as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. Gone. Just like that. No sadness. No grief. No hesitation. Only relief. But the worst part was still coming. The man reached into his briefcase. He removed a folder. Linda opened it. Inside were financial documents. Several pages carried Sarah's name. The two began discussing transfers, accounts, approvals, money, large amounts of money. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The woman she trusted most appeared to be hiding something enormous. Yet one question remained. Why? Why would Linda betray her? And how long had it been happening? As they prepared to leave, Linda said something that froze Sarah in place. Something that changed everything. Something far more terrifying than stolen money. Linda looked directly at the man and whispered, "Now we only have one problem left." The man frowned. "What problem?" Linda lowered her voice, but Sarah still heard it. "The investigator, David." The room suddenly felt colder, because if Linda was worried about David, then she knew far more than anyone realized. And for the first time since faking her death, Sarah began wondering if her own life might actually be in danger. The hidden betrayal. Sarah sat frozen in her chair. The restaurant noise faded into the background. The only thing she could hear was Linda's voice. "Now we only have one problem left. The investigator, David." Why was Linda worried about David? More importantly, how did she even know he was investigating? Sarah exchanged a glance with David. The veteran investigator's expression had become serious. Very serious. For the first time since the plan began, he looked genuinely concerned. Linda and the mysterious man eventually stood and left the restaurant. David waited several minutes before speaking. "We need to be careful now." Sarah nodded. "What aren't you telling me?" David leaned back. "I didn't tell anyone I was investigating." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means someone has been watching me." The drive back to the cabin was silent. Questions filled Sarah's mind. The deeper they dug, the more complicated everything became. At first, she believed someone might be stealing money. Now it felt like she had stumbled into something much larger. Something hidden for years. That night, sleep refused to come. Sarah sat by the cabin window watching rain slide down the glass. She kept thinking about Linda, her best friend, the woman she had trusted with her deepest fears, the woman who had comforted her after Richard died. Could all of that have been fake? Or was there another explanation? The next morning, David arrived carrying new documents. His face looked exhausted. "I found something." Sarah immediately stood. "What is it?" David placed a folder on the table. Inside were financial records stretching back almost 10 years. Sarah examined the pages. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed a pattern. Small amounts of money, tiny withdrawals, minor transfers. individually insignificant, together enormous. Someone had been quietly siphoning money from her accounts for nearly a decade. Not millions at once, thousands at a time, small enough to avoid attention, large enough to build a fortune. Sarah felt sick. How much? David looked down. Almost $2 million. The room fell silent. $2 million. Gone. Stolen little by little. Over years. By someone who knew exactly how to avoid suspicion. Sarah slowly lowered the folder. Who did it? David hesitated. Sarah immediately knew. Tell me. The investigator exhaled heavily. Most of the transfers traced back to accounts connected to Linda. The words fell like a knife. For a moment, Sarah simply stared at him, unable to process what she had heard. Linda, not a stranger, not a criminal. Linda, the woman who had stood beside her through the hardest years of her life. Tears formed in Sarah's eyes, not because of the money, because of the betrayal. Money could be replaced. Trust could not. Hours later, Sarah sat alone. Memories flooded her mind. Birthdays, vacations, holiday dinners, years of friendship. Were any of those moments real? Or had she been living inside a carefully constructed lie? Late that afternoon, David received a phone call. After hanging up, he looked troubled. What happened? Sarah asked. I found a man from the restaurant. Sarah immediately leaned forward. Who is he? His name is Victor Hayes. The name meant nothing to her. Who is he? David's answer surprised her. He's not a businessman. Then what is he? David paused. A former accountant. Sarah frowned. Former? David nodded. He lost his professional license 7 years ago. Why? The investigator slid another document across the table. Sarah read the headline. Financial fraud investigation. Victor Hayes. Her pulse quickened. Victor had been investigated years earlier for helping wealthy clients hide money. The case had never resulted in prison, but his reputation had been destroyed. Sarah looked up. You're saying Linda is working with him? It appears that way. Everything suddenly became clearer. The stolen money, the secret meetings, the hidden accounts. But one mystery remained. Why now? Why fake concern for years only to become careless after Sarah's death? That evening, David uncovered another clue. A property purchase, 3 years earlier. A luxurious beach house, owned secretly through multiple companies. The true owners? Linda and Victor. Sarah couldn't believe it. While pretending to be her closest friend, Linda had been building an entirely separate life. A life funded by stolen money. A life Sarah unknowingly paid for. The betrayal hurt more than Sarah could describe. But something still didn't fit. If Linda had already stolen millions, why continue? Why risk everything? David seemed bothered by the same question. The next morning, he finally found the answer. And it changed everything. He rushed into the cabin, carrying a thick envelope. His eyes were wide. Sarah immediately knew something was wrong. What is it? David placed the document on the table. Sarah looked down. Her blood ran cold. It was a copy of her will. Not the current version. An older version. One she hadn't used in years. And beside several sections were handwritten notes. Calculations. Percentages. Expected payouts. Someone had been studying her death for a very long time. Sarah stared at the notes, then noticed something even more disturbing. A single sentence had been written in the margin. A sentence that made her heart stop. Everything changes when Richard's secret stays buried. Sarah looked up, confused, terrified. Richard, her late husband. What secret? David slowly sat down. Sarah, his voice sounded different. Careful, uncertain. I think this was never really about your money. Sarah felt a chill move through her body. If not the money. David looked directly into her eyes. I think this started with your husband. The room became silent. Richard had been dead for over a year. Yet, somehow, his name kept appearing. His secret, his past, his hidden connections. For the first time, Sarah realized she might not have known everything about the man she loved either. And somewhere inside the growing mystery, a truth had been waiting for decades. A truth powerful enough to make people steal, lie, and betray. But what Sarah didn't know was that someone else had just discovered she was still alive. And that person was already on their way to find her. The secret Richard took to his grave. The storm arrived just after midnight. Thunder rolled across the mountains surrounding the cabin. Rain pounded against the roof. Inside, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at a photograph. It was one of the last pictures she had taken with Richard. They were smiling, happy, comfortable, like two people with no secrets between them. Now she wasn't so sure. For more than 30 years, Richard had been her husband, her closest friend, the person she trusted more than anyone. Yet somehow, after his death, a hidden secret was beginning to unravel. A secret powerful enough to destroy friendships. A secret powerful enough to make people risk everything. And Sarah still had no idea what it was. David sat across from her. A collection of files covered the table. Most of them related to Richard's past. His business records, his investments, his personal correspondence. Hours of investigation had revealed something unexpected. Richard had quietly withdrawn large sums of money several years before his death. The money had never entered Sarah's accounts. It had never appeared in any business records. It had simply vanished. Where did it go? Sarah asked. David rubbed his forehead. That's what we're trying to figure out. The investigator opened another file. Inside were copies of old property records. Most looked ordinary, until Sarah noticed one address. A small town nearly 6 hours away. She frowned. I've never heard of this place. David nodded. Neither had I. The property had been purchased 22 years earlier. The owner listed on the documents wasn't Richard, at least not directly. It belonged to a company that no longer existed. But David had traced the ownership. The trail led directly back to Richard. Sarah stared at the address. Why would he hide property from me? David didn't answer. Because he didn't know. The following morning, they made a decision. They would visit the property. If answers existed, they might be waiting there. The drive took most of the day. The farther they traveled, the more nervous Sarah became. Questions filled her mind. Had Richard been hiding another family? A secret business? A criminal past? Every possibility felt worse than the last. By late afternoon, they arrived. The property sat at the edge of a quiet rural community. An aging farmhouse surrounded by trees. Nothing about it seemed extraordinary. Yet Richard had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. Sarah slowly stepped from the car. Her heart pounded. For a moment, she considered turning around. Maybe some secrets were better left buried. But she had come too far. Inside, dust covered the furniture. The house appeared abandoned. Years had passed since anyone lived there. David carefully searched room after room. Most contained nothing useful. Old furniture, empty closets, forgotten belongings. Then they reached the attic, and everything changed. Hidden beneath loose floorboards was a metal box. Locked, sealed, protected. David carefully forced it open. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, letters, and a leather journal. Sarah immediately recognized the handwriting. Richard's. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first pages contained ordinary entries, business notes, travel records, personal reflections. Then she reached an entry dated 27 years earlier, and the truth finally began to emerge. Richard had made a terrible mistake, a mistake that haunted him for the rest of his life. Years before meeting Sarah, Richard had been involved in a business venture, a venture that collapsed unexpectedly. Several investors lost everything. Families suffered. Lives were destroyed. Although Richard wasn't entirely responsible, he blamed himself. Deeply, the guilt never left him. According to the journal, Richard secretly spent decades helping the affected families, paying debts, funding education, supporting people anonymously. He never told Sarah because he feared she would see him differently. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. This wasn't the dark secret she expected. This was guilt, regret, a man trying to make things right. But then she found another letter, and suddenly everything became far more complicated. The letter wasn't written by Richard. It was written to him. The sender's name immediately caught Sarah's attention. Victor Hayes, the same man Linda had been meeting. Her pulse quickened. Years ago, Victor had worked with Richard. According to the letter, Victor knew everything about the failed investment scheme. Everything, including details that could ruin Richard's reputation forever. Sarah continued reading. The final paragraph made her blood run cold. If anything happens to me, the truth will eventually surface. You cannot hide it forever. David looked over her shoulder. Neither spoke. The implication was obvious. Victor had known Richard for decades, far longer than anyone realized. Suddenly, Linda's involvement made more sense. She wasn't chasing Sarah. She was chasing something Richard left behind, something connected to this hidden chapter of his life. As the sun began setting outside, Sarah noticed one final item inside the box, a sealed envelope. On the front were 4 words written in Richard's handwriting, for Sarah only. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single page, a confession, an apology, and a warning. Richard explained that someone had been searching for evidence connected to the old investment disaster, someone who wanted access to information hidden among his private records, someone willing to manipulate others to get it. The final sentence nearly stopped Sarah's heart. If you were reading this, it means they finally came for what I protected. Sarah looked at David. Neither needed to ask the obvious question. What exactly had Richard protected? Because the answer still remained hidden. But before they could investigate further, David's phone rang. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. When he hung up, his face had turned pale. What happened? Sarah asked. David swallowed hard. We have a problem. What kind of problem? The investigator looked directly at her. Someone broke into your cabin. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The cabin was supposed to be secret. Only 2 people knew its location, Sarah and David. The implication was terrifying. Someone had found them. Someone knew she was alive. And whoever it was had left a message waiting inside. A message consisting of only 6 words. 6 words that changed everything. We know you are alive, Sarah, the woman who came back from the dead. Sarah stared at David. Neither of them spoke. The words echoed inside her mind. We know you are alive, Sarah. For the first time since faking her death, the danger felt real. Very real. Whoever had broken into the cabin wasn't guessing. They knew. They knew she was alive. They knew where she had been hiding. And they wanted her to know they were watching. The drive back was tense. Night had already fallen. Rain streaked across the windshield. Sarah sat silently, staring into the darkness. Her thoughts raced. Had Linda discovered the truth? Had Victor? Or was someone else involved? When they finally arrived at the cabin, the front door hung slightly open. The lock had been forced. Furniture had been disturbed. Drawers had been emptied. Whoever entered had searched thoroughly. But strangely, nothing appeared stolen. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for information. David carefully inspected the rooms. Then he found it, a folded note resting on the kitchen table. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately. Victor Hayes. The note contained only one sentence. You have something that belongs to me. Sarah's heart pounded. The journal. The letters. Richard's hidden records. Victor believed Sarah possessed evidence he wanted. Evidence he had spent years searching for. But what exactly was hidden inside those documents? Back at the farmhouse, David examined every page again. Hour after hour. Nothing. Then shortly before sunrise, he discovered something unusual. A page in Richard's journal seemed thicker than the others. Carefully, he separated the paper. A hidden compartment had been built into the journal. Inside was a flash drive. Sarah stared at it. After all these years, this was what everyone had been searching for. David immediately connected it to his laptop. Several files appeared. Financial records, emails, contracts, thousands of documents. The deeper they looked, the more shocking the truth became. Years ago, after the investment disaster, Richard discovered something disturbing. The collapse had not been an accident. Someone had intentionally manipulated the finances. Investors hadn't simply lost money. They had been robbed. And the person responsible wasn't Richard. It was Victor Hayes. Sarah felt her breath catch. Victor, for decades, he had allowed Richard to carry the blame, the guilt, the shame, all while secretly hiding his own involvement. Richard had uncovered the truth years later. But instead of exposing Victor publicly, he collected evidence quietly. Evidence powerful enough to destroy Victor forever. Evidence hidden inside the journal. Suddenly everything made sense. Victor wasn't searching for money. He was searching for proof. Proof that could ruin him. Proof Richard had protected for decades. Sarah leaned back in disbelief. Linda knew. David nodded. I think so. The investigator opened another file. An email appeared. It was recent. Only 6 months old. The sender was Victor. The recipient was Linda. The message was brief. Find a journal. The room fell silent. Sarah finally understood. Linda hadn't become friends with her for money. At least, not in the beginning. Their friendship had been genuine. But over time, Victor discovered Linda's connection to Sarah and slowly manipulated her. Promised her wealth. Promised her security. Promised her a future. Until eventually she crossed a line she could never uncross. The betrayal was real. But so was the tragedy behind it. For a long moment, Sarah felt more sadness than anger. Then David received another phone call. This one changed everything. Authorities had enough evidence. The investigation could finally move forward. Victor's financial crimes, the stolen money, the fraudulent accounts, everything. But there was one final thing Sarah needed to do. She needed to come back. 3 days later, the town gathered once again. This time not for a funeral, for a press conference. Reporters filled the room. Cameras lined the walls. Questions filled the air. Nobody knew why they had been invited. Then the doors opened. The room went silent. Every face froze. Every camera turned. And every jaw dropped. Sarah Whitmore walked into the room. Alive. The shock was immediate. Reporters gasped. People stood from their seats. Some looked terrified. Others looked relieved. News spread across the town within minutes. The woman everyone believed was dead had returned. Sarah stepped to the podium. For several seconds, she simply looked at the crowd. Faces she recognized. Faces she trusted. Faces she no longer understood. Then she began speaking. Calmly. Clearly. She explained everything. The fake death. The investigation. The hidden theft. The secret meetings. The years of deception. The room listened in stunned silence. Then came the evidence. Documents appeared on screens. Financial records. Emails. Transfers. Every secret exposed. There was nowhere left to hide. Victor Hayes was arrested later that day. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Years of fraud. Years of manipulation. Years of lies. His carefully constructed world collapsed almost overnight. Linda eventually confessed. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted her role. She expected Sarah to hate her, to destroy her, to seek revenge. Instead, Sarah surprised everyone, especially herself, because despite the pain, despite the betrayal, Sarah chose forgiveness. Not because Linda deserved it, but because Sarah refused to carry bitterness for the rest of her life. Some wounds never completely heal, but they do not have to control the future. Weeks later, Sarah visited Richard's grave. The sun was setting. The cemetery was quiet. She placed flowers beside the headstone. For a long time, she simply stood there, thinking, remembering, understanding. Richard wasn't perfect. Neither was she. Neither was anyone. The people we love carry secrets, regrets, mistakes, hidden battles. Sometimes we discover those truths too late. Sometimes we never discover them at all. But what matters most isn't how people fail. It's what they choose to do afterward. Richard spent decades trying to make things right. And in the end, that mattered. As Sarah turned to leave, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because every question had been answered. Not because every wound had healed. But because the truth was finally free. And so was she.